There's a reform plan for a lot of sectors here in China, including about the rural area, and therefore we're joined once again by Professor Wen Tiejun and our friend Jim Harkness. Well, the first question I have for you when we talk about rural China is really, what is the role of rural China? I'm very confused. Is it a sponge absorbing all the labors here in China? Is it going to be a potential market for a huge amount of potential consumers? Is it a place for guaranteeing China's food security? What is it? Professor Wen, you're smiling. Good answer, maybe.
I think that all of your description is right. But the most important, for the rural area, is that for soft landing. When China meets a very serious global crisis, soft landing in rural area. So if the crisis happen in the urban area, that must be hard landing. Mm-hmm. So it's a very strategic area, not only for food production or for labor potential force and hiders in the rural area. So, we may know that we have many times crisis during these 60 years New China founded. But every time, if the governments can make rural as a kind of soft landing area, we can just pass.
Wow, that's quite a good airport you're talking about there. Okay. So it is soft landing for China's economy and possibly for the urban population as well. But is it going to be easy takeoff for the rural population?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think I would agree with Professor Wen that everything you said is part of the role of China's countryside. And in fact, in every country, we use the term multifunctional to talk about agriculture because of course, it needs to provide food, but it's also part of commerce. It provides employment. Globally, it's the biggest employer on the planet. And also, it's a place where people interact most directly with nature and natural systems. So the quality of water, the quality of the soil and air, biodiversity is all tied into agriculture. In China, one of the challenges for rural people to take off themselves is the fact that they are the soft landing pad for the urban manufacturing economy. We have a very large rural population, very small land holdings, and in most countries in that situation, maybe land holdings would get larger so that they could be more efficient economically, or farmers would organize themselves so that they could maybe defend themselves in the marketplace more effectively. In China, people don't really have the option of selling their land, and there are also limits on farmers' ability to defend their rights. So it's a dilemma for rural people.
Though there's a lot of new policies coming up, debating about the possibilities that you have been talking about. But for me, it's also interesting to know another question, since we are a little bit confused still about the function of rural China, a soft landing place. But on the other hand, a lot of people are arguing, even with such a vast area of rural China, even with such a huge population in the rural area, China is still having some challenges facing the food security issues, as they say, especially from, quote-unquote, the West. Mr. Harkness, your thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly think that there are always pressures to change trade policies so that it's easier to have importing and exporting. And what we saw in the food crisis that happened around the world in 2008 was that many countries that had gone along with global trade agreements and opened their markets found that when they were, when the price of food went up, they didn't have enough food to continue feeding their people. And China has had fairly strong food security policies to make sure that there is enough food in the country. I don't see those policies loosening anytime in the future. Is there something more specific you were talking about?
You don't see that those policies loosening at the time, but those policies are still functioning, do you think, to the extent that we want it to be?
I think that the first is the investment into agriculture and also the rural infrastructure is extremely important, because that when we have several years, continue in several years to invest in agriculture, and then we may not only have a kind of food security, but also the human security, because a large amount of population live in countryside.
Right.
By that, we absorb large amount of these surplus labors by the rural infrastructure. You know, the total amount of this 4 years investment into infrastructure in countryside is at more than 1 trillion. So 1 trillion means that you can have at least 10 or 20 million laborers can have a cash job.
Right.
So that is very important for give a very strong base for the whole country's sustainable development.
But at the same time, people are arguing the genetically modified seeds, for example, most of them were actually from the West at the moment, and therefore China may not be able to still maintain its bank of seeds as a result of that, and that is going to be threatening to China's food security. Agree with that or not?
I think that he is very good to answer the question because he is very familiar with this field.
Well, and also because some of the biggest seed companies are from my country. And in fact, even in the United States, farmers are concerned about very large agribusinesses owning all of the rights to the seeds, because traditionally farmers would save them, but now they no longer have the right to do that. So I think it's a legitimate concern to want to keep control over seeds and the right to use seeds in the public domain and not have it be totally privatized. I think there is a legitimate concern about food security, but I think that that's true in other parts of the rural economy as well, like investment in processing. China's soy crushing industry, which is a very important part of the grain economy, is now mostly controlled by several large companies from the US and Brazil. Right. So I think it's very important that in addition to these other food security policies that China has, that they also think about the implications of germplasm privatization and genetically modified seeds, but also of foreign investment in China's agricultural economy.
Not only foreign investment, but also trade policy at the same time, because we see some sets of policies already been designed much earlier when it comes to the crop quality standards, the wheat quality standard, and also to the trade policy as to how much people can sell to each other, at what expense. And some also argue, Professor Wen, that the market is such that if you have 10% control of the food here in the world, you can have actually making the market fluctuate 50% up and down. That's a huge amount.
Absolutely right. I think that Dr. Jim, as a kind of American, he gave answer is very good for calm down our passion for these new things. I mean, it doesn't mean that we don't want to develop these GMO and new technologies and so on and so, because it's a kind of international competition. But anyway, we need to be very careful to take every different ideas into our consideration.
All right. Yes, we need to be very careful. However, there's also a very exciting topic that we are talking about here, which is rural China. The changes taking place and to be taking place here in rural China. You're watching Voices and Votes, and we'll be back